This is an epic story. One over 100 years in the making. Probably not part of the American dream that Carl Laemmle had when he immigrated from Germany as a teenager, but I think he'd be thrilled with the results. This is my hometown. It's kind of normal, except we have dragons and monsters. Crazy thing is, people from all over the world still flock here every day because we have theme parks. Lots of them. And the newest one is Universal's Epic Universe in Orlando. It's the first major theme park to open in the United States in over 20 years. I got to see it in its preview stage shortly before its official opening. It's a visual feast, including a nod to the classic Universal monster movies, Harry Potter movies, How to Train Your Dragon, and the Super Mario Brothers. If you ever feel like your life resembles a video game, where you're constantly facing obstacles, traps, pitfalls, and dead ends, then this video is for you. This video is like a little fun field trip for filmmaking with brass knuckles, where I could just walk around Epic Universe and take photos and shoot videos. So please like or subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. And I also want to thank Alex at the B-Mode channel for sharing his footage with me to use in this video. This burning windmill is one of his shots. But all of this is just part of a larger story, one rooted in reality, one that's as inspirational as it gets. His name was Carl, and he didn't speak much English, didn't have much money, but he did have a dream of a better life. He arrived in New York City from Germany in 1884 when he was just 17 years old. He took whatever job he could, errand boy, bottle cleaner, newspaper hawker, and he was not an overnight sensation. Until he was 30, he lived in cheap boarding houses. He eventually connected with an older brother in Chicago and moved to the Midwest and began working in the clothing business. That led to a solid opportunity in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. A lot of Germans there. He worked his way up to bookkeeper and then manager of a clothing store. Into his late 30s, he was living the American dream. He had a good job, a wife and child, but wait for it, he had a falling out with the owner of the clothing store and quit. Now what? He took a trip to Chicago with the hopes of finding space to open a five and dime store. He was searching for a business that had mass appeal. He found it by accident. While starting a new business at age 40 may not be ideal, he did have an unfair advantage. He understood business, sales, marketing. He understood supply and demand. He understood cash flow, and he understood hard work. It was once said that he worked so late at night that when he left the office, he ran into himself coming to work in the morning. This is the highly compressed version of his epic story. It was on that trip to Chicago that Carl Laemmle saw his first Nickelodeon movie theater, an early version of movie theaters today. People would pay a nickel and watch short silent films. Remember, this is in the early 1900s, well before the internet and television. Basically, all that was needed around 1905 was a storefront, chairs or some benches that could hold 200 people, a screen, a projector, and you were in business. Some of the nicer places had pianos. In 1906, Laemmle opened his first Nickelodeon in Chicago, and it was instantly successful. So he opened another one. This led to him eventually getting involved in distribution and film production. In his 1931 book on Laemmle, John Drinkwater wrote, "Film production in the early days was a tough, rough business. Like mob tough. One group in Pittsburgh was formed simply to put Laemmle's company out of business." To escape some of the corruption of the early film business by the East Coast group that controlled the film industry, Laemmle moved part of his operation to a little town in California with a population of just 5,000, a place called Hollywood, and he became one of the independent pioneers of the movie industry. In 1912, he co-founded Universal Studios, today the oldest movie studio in North America, and became the president. 2 years later, he would buy out his partners and purchase 230 acres of ranch land just a few miles north of Hollywood, and Universal City was soon born. A self-contained city studio where he had everything he needed to make movies. Complete with a studio larger than a football field, 80 dressing rooms, 2 restaurants that could serve 1,200 people, horses, cattle, a greenhouse, a library, a hospital, a police department, and wild animals from around the world. Universal City contained an outdoor scene that could be turned into the streets of the world. Monte Carlo, Cairo, Tokyo, Madrid, London, Berlin. And Laemmle was the first to open a studio for public viewing in 1915, where fans could watch films being made from a grandstand on the central stage. This practice was discontinued when the silent movie era ended, but Universal opened its famed studio tour at Universal Studios Hollywood in the 1960s. Starting in 1915 and for the next 20 years, this 5'2" Jewish man was a giant in the film industry. It was said of that without him, the story of the birth and progress of the motion picture industry would be incomplete. One writer said, more than anyone, he made the movie-going experience part of the social life of America. In 1931, the business that he was once told was a passing fad became the fourth largest industry in the world. Laemmle gave a start to many people in the film business, including a young Walt Disney, whose animation for Oswald the Rabbit for Universal looks a little bit like a prototype for Mickey Mouse. But like all great stories, there were storm clouds on the horizon. Following the Great Depression, things got tough financially. He'd named his son head of production with mixed results, but two of Junior's greatest achievements were producing All Quiet on the Western Front, Universal's first Oscar-winning best film, as well as producing the movies that are now known as Universal's classic monsters. And two of those characters, Frankenstein and Dracula, would become two of the most iconic characters in cinematic history. Unfortunately, a 1936 financial gamble on the movie Showboat resulted in both Carl and his son being ousted from Universal. Neither would ever make another movie again. Fortunately for the elder Laemmle, it came with a $5 million buyout. The elder Laemmle was a long way from his days on a ship coming to America from Germany with just $50 in his pockets. But he didn't forget where he came from, and he spent the remaining years of his life and a considerable amount of money helping over 300 families flee Germany during the rise of the Third Reich. If you watch the documentary The U.S. and the Holocaust, you'll see that in the late 1930s, the American government and the American people were not excited about getting involved in the war in Europe. And jobs were scarce enough here during the Great Depression, here in the States, without bringing in more immigrants. Laemmle had been visiting his home country every year since the end of World War I, and he saw the destructive changes coming before most people did in the United States. Certainly long before Pearl Harbor would be the wake-up call for America. Carl Laemmle died in 1939 at age 72. It would seem that we're a million miles away from the fantasy worlds of epic universe, but I don't think we really are. World building and storytelling touch on our humanity. The desire to live in a bigger story, the desire to tap into special powers that allow us to resist evil, to train dragons, whatever the dragons are you face in your life. If you're familiar with the Super Mario original video game that inspired the Super Mario movie, then you know that the objective of the game is to progress through various levels, to overcome obstacles, to defeat the evil Bowser, and rescue Princess Peach. Mario is one resilient Italian plumber. Former NASA engineer and science YouTuber Mark Rober gave a TED Talk on the Super Mario effect. He said that when he was a kid, his friends only talked about getting to the next level. They didn't talk about their failures. Failures in the video game could be that your character falls into a chasm and dies, but you don't die, and you don't quit playing the game just because your character died. You've learned a lesson. The next time you face that pitfall, you run faster, jump higher, whatever. That's Carl Laemmle's story. That's a Universal story.